Today, we will be introducing our new season, Season 2 of Adapted, where we will be discussing detective fiction and noir. And for today's episode, we will be reviewing a few essays on the topic of the detective and noir, as well as looking at a silent film adaptation from 1916 of Sherlock Holmes, one of the great film adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. A character who is maybe not.
Let's just say it was an early adaptation of Sherlock
It
Holmes.
was an early adaptation. It actually existed before the conclusion of the Sherlock Holmes stories. So, very excited to talk about that. But what I want to start off today is talking about what we're going to be doing for season two. So we finished up season one with the Orchid Thief, and we're moving in a different direction this time around. We want to concentrate on a certain topic or a certain genre, namely detective fiction and noir, if we can in fact call noir a genre. And the idea here is we're going to trace the evolution of this genre or this style through a number of iterations from Sherlock Holmes to Agatha Christie up into the hard-boiled of Raymond Chandler and people like Michael Caine, and through the modern world, concluding with In the Name of the Rose, the book and the adaptation. So a complete trajectory starting from this Victorian British sensibility up until this sort of pre-modern meets postmodern detective fiction, which is super interesting, and I'm really excited to talk about all of this. And there's a few things I want to bring forward as we explore these different adaptations and explore how they transform this, I think, fairly familiar genre. Most people know the detective or the hard-boiled or the noir or something of it, or have enjoyed some version of it. If it's a movie, if it's a crime thriller, if it's a James Patterson novel, or if it's NCIS on television, this style seems to be ubiquitous. And yet it's also something that really doesn't exist, I think, very much before the Victorian era. And so it's something that is kind of, I think, uniquely modern as well. And I think this will be fun to see how these things change and transform. And that's what I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about how this kind of this sort of romanticized, sort of enlightenment informed idea of the rational, empirical detective who scientifically goes on these adventures and finds out these cases or helps society using these kind of scientific methods to solve cases, how that transforms into these hard-boiled and kind of bitter characters in these alienating societies, and then even further than that into monks in the 14th century who are trying to deal with postmodern libraries and things like that. I think it's an incredibly flexible and interesting form, the detective fiction. And I think I'll start with asking you guys about that, about what's maybe exciting about what's upcoming this season, what you're anticipating, any ideas about detective fiction generally.
Tom, did you say we're doing a Michael Caine noir? Put that gun down, Buster. Or I'm
Yeah.
gonna punch you right in the jib.
Wrong Kane, sorry. Oh
Oh,
God,
not
what's his
Michael
name?
Caine.
James Kane.
James Kane. I'm sorry, not Michael Kane.
James
James.
M. Kane.
Yeah, James M. Kane.
James Michael Caine.
I don't know what his middle name is. James Kane.
Mhm.
I actually was wondering when you said it, I went, what is his name? I was like, it's definitely not
It
Michael.
sounded wrong to me too when I
Yeah,
said it. I'm like, huh,
James Kane.
Sounded right to me. That would be a very
Um,
funny noir.
yeah, no, James Kane, who wrote The Postman Always Rings Twice. And he wrote the novel Double Indemnity, but he didn't write the screenplay for Double Indemnity, which is actually one of the better sort of adaptations because the book is pretty good and the movie is very good, but there are actually sort of some major differences. Raymond Chandler actually wrote the the screenplay for. So it's like you've got like all these great names of noir, but Raymond Chandler wrote the screenplay for Double Indemnity, and it's got like some significant differences that are very sort of Chandler-esque because apparently he hated Kane, and so he didn't like the book, and so he basically was like, "I'm gonna fix it for him," and so he like rewrote the movie to fix the novel version of Double Indemnity.
Yeah, that is going to be a fun week. This is my first time reading Raymond Chandler, and I deeply enjoy his work. That has been very exciting. And I've seen Double Indemnity before. I think I've actually read more of Kane than I think of either Hammett or Chandler. But yeah, that'll be an exciting thing.
Guys, I don't really know what noir is. I'm sure I've seen it. I don't think I've read it.
No one does. Don't worry.
I I think I'm coming into this. I think I'll be the one asking the questions and not answering too many questions. I did watch the Sherlock Holmes silent film for this week, and if that's what we're signing up for, oh boy, this is going to be a long season. I'm assuming it'll get a little different, but I guess I'm picturing black and white, shadowy things. Actually, on our other show, Talking Pictures Trivia, we did a few noirs. We did Chinatown, The Third Man. Did we do? We did Maltese Falcon
We did.
twice, depending on how you count it. Um, yeah, so
We did Double Indemnity, didn't we?
I
We
don't think
didn't.
we did.
We did
Oh,
not
we
do
never
Double.
did Double
Yeah.
Indemnity. Oh
No.
man, how did I? So you might notice many of those were the ones I picked. There's a pattern here.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I'm excited to learn about this, but I'm hopefully the audience is already into it, so they might even be further along than I am. But I'm going to be learning on this show.
Yeah, I think this is probably the genre of fiction and film that I know that I think I have the most comfort talking about. Um, it's sort of this is my kind of wheelhouse. So I'm looking forward to this season. Um, I think as Tom said, there is something uniquely modern about detective fiction, and there's an argument to be made that it's one of the only genres that you can sort of pinpoint its exact beginning, exactly when it begins, and you can follow its sort of development over time. And most other genres you can't really do that. There's an argument to be made that this is one of the few genres that you know exactly when it begins and you can follow its development exactly its progression. So it makes for a really interesting discussion. I think it's a uniquely modern genre. And I think, although I get the argument, we'll talk probably about this a little later, that noir isn't really a genre. Detective fiction certainly is a genre, but noir isn't really a genre. But I think that in general, this sort of general area is a uniquely modern one. I think there's something about it that speaks to modern sensibility more than a lot of other genres of literature do. And there's a reason why most of the best sellers at any given time are sort of thrillers or mystery stories or noirs. I think there's an aspect of it that speaks to a popular imagination in a way that most other types of literature and film don't.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially. And that moment, I think that we can trace as the origin of the detective story is 1841,
Yeah.
right? With the publishing of, I think it's Graham's Magazine of the murders on the Rue Morgue of Edgar Allan Poe. And you have the detective there is Auguste Dupin, who appears in three different stories of Poe's. Um, but I think he called his three tales of ratiocination was his
Ratiocination is usually.
ratio. Do you say? I say
I've always heard it
ratio.
as ratiocination.
Either way, that was his, and I think that's the modern thing that I think that's what makes it modern also, is that there is this like enlightenment idea in Dupin and especially in Holmes. They're scholars, they're investigators, they're using science and reason to figure things out and make the world better. And especially in Holmes's stuff and in Arthur Conan Doyle's stuff, it's also very hopeful. But at the same time, it's very romantic. I mean, Holmes is a romantic figure. He's a knight. Uh, and we see that later with Chandler's characters as well. Philip Marlowe is actually referred to as a Galahad in one of the novels.
I mean, it's more specific even than that with Marlowe. The very first, do you remember what the very first thing that he sees when he walks in the big sleep?
No, I don't.
He sees a giant stained glass window of a knight rescuing a maiden in a tower.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the very first
Yes.
thing he sees. Like Chandler
Mhm.
is very consciously making the direct link between sort of the knight, the warrior, and the modern detective. That's like 100% a link that he's making with Marlowe.
Yeah, and I think that that is also, though, in part dealing with, by making him a knight, that's in part dealing with a sort of failure. I don't want to call it a failure of the Enlightenment, but maybe moving past the Enlightenment and some of the promises that it had of this kind of perfectly Whiggish improving world, which was part of the promise of the 18th century, was things were just going to get better and better and better, and people were going to become perfect, and more improved once we have this kind of reason and science. And you see that a bit in, I think, the 19th century stuff, especially in Holmes. But when it comes to the, like the hard boiled, and especially, Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and Kane, like that sort of expectation is gone, right? We're not going to be in this perfectly Whiggish world, but we still have some of these tools of deduction, and actually we're looking even further back into the past, looking towards these knight figures to be those kind of romantic heroes. But it's a far more pessimistic world than any Arthur ever had to deal with. And so it's a really interesting, really interesting transition. And it seems to detective fiction is the it I mean there. Detective fiction seems to really have its finger on the pulse of the modern world and what the popular culture likes. And I think that's part of it. It kind of gets at the optimism and the pessimism of a particular culture at any time. And it offers, that kind of hopeful character in the sense of there's always some sort of knight who's going to try to do the good, but it's not always guarantee that you're living in a world where the good can survive. Sometimes it can. I think the earlier you go, the better. Um, I think Poe is very hopeful. Arthur Conan Doyle is very hopeful. I think Agatha Christie is as well. Those you don't get the sense that the world is going to fall apart in an Agatha Christie novel. Things will pick back up as soon as they figure out this case. But as we get further into the 20th century and now into the 21st, the pessimism, it's sort of dealing with the pessimism in a way that I think a lot of modern audiences really like. So, shall we get into some of the things we read for today? Um, and we could start with G.K. Chesterton and his article here, which I think is, we've talked about this a little bit, which is his work, Defense of Detective Stories. And this is a very short article in which he more or less, not more or less, he definitely defends the essential value of the detective story, um, in which he says, quote, "The first essential value of the detective story lies in this, that it is the earliest and only form of popular literature in which is expressed some sense of the poetry of modern life." End quote. And it's a really intriguing article because it also has the romanticized idea of the detective, but he recognizes that the city is this kind of essential aspect of the detective story, which isn't something I'd considered before. I think of that more as the noir type thing, but his idea is that the city becomes this place that isn't that you no longer need sort of the author as making metaphors, because if you have the night in the woods, anything that's metaphorical is the author putting it upon a natural landscape or something like that. Chesterton's point here is in the city, everything is literally put in place by man. Every brick is put there by people. Every building is built up there. The author is no longer kind of metaphorically implanting the touch of the human on things. It's actually literally there. And so the city becomes this kind of completely human and completely modern version of the England of Arthur or something like that. I think it was a really interesting take. What did you guys think about it?
I mean, I agree with him. I mean, he's taking things a bit far in the sense that
Yes.
yes, the cities are an interesting place for the set and there's sort of in the sense that you couldn't quite have literature that quite did that before. Even so, you go back to ancient literature, most of it's not sort of city novels,
Mhm.
you go and read something like the Satyricon. That's not really what it is. It's not about the city. It's about, it is about people living in cities, but it's not about the city, and sort of the setting and things like that. Now, there obviously are things where things have metaphorical meanings in cities too. Those stupid glasses in Great Gatsby or whatever, that the man with his that thing. But
Yes.
it's there. They
Mhm.
can do that. They can accentuate this kind of stuff. So he's taking it a bit far. But I think his case is very valid in the sense that what he's trying to really argue is that it's not that detective fiction isn't just a form of pop entertainment, that it actually has literary value, and that I think he's starting to pick up on.
Yeah, I think that that's important. That it's not just popular, but it's popular because it has this kind of artistic merit. And that's, the problem with that take, I would say, is that basically also describes all of early modern literature. Early modern literature is the best of it survives because it was popular. And when we read it, we recognize its greatness. So that's not unique to detective fiction. But I do think it's important that um, Chesterton recognizes that, yeah, the popular isn't something outside of the artistic, and that you can save detective fiction by, or he wants to save detective fiction by simply not dismissing it as popular, but using the popular to highlight its importance.
Yeah, one of the things he says, is it not true, for example, that the populace prefer bad literature to good? And I'm thinking, how many podcasts are out there about, bad literature? This guy had no this guy had no clue what was coming. Is detective literature considered, not high shelf? Is it considered lower quality?
It usually is. So it's considered pulp, right? So it's entertaining stuff
Okay.
as opposed to artistic stuff. It's like James Patterson novels are not winning the Man Prize or anything like that. Um, and so I think there's this sort of idea of there's the genre-free literature and then there's the good stuff, that type of thing, which for Chesterton is nonsense, right? And I think it is nonsense. That's why science fiction is also dismissed in this way. That's just genre literature. Or the real one is romance. Romance literature is dismissed entirely. Um, but I think his point, though, is that what this brings in is the city, and that the city becomes this kind of romantic place that detective fiction, because you have a person who's willing to traverse it, namely the detective, is exploring the virtues and vices of the city in a way that is uniquely human. That literature up to that point really didn't do that. That it's the literature, detective fiction is the literature of the city, and as such, it has this kind of effect. Um, and I think that goes into a lot of things about what we were talking, a lot of the things we were talking about, rather, which is that this is really a very, very modern thing, detective fiction, that it is dealing with the kind of capture of the world by people and by what we call scientific progress or rational progress or something like that. And I think he's touching on it. Now Chesterton is celebrating it. And I think later when we see the noir and the detective fiction take on the style of the noir, it's no longer a celebration. The city becomes the asphalt jungle. It's this dangerous place. That is really a reflection of bad things in people, the pessimistic, the dangerous, the animal-like. It actually reveals how much closer we are to beasts than further. But I don't think Chesterton's there yet. And I think Chesterton sees in the city and then the detective figure, the new Lancelot going through the city, a sense of the romantic possibilities of the modern person. I think this connects to our discussion up to this point because Chesterton is putting forth a very optimistic idea of the city as this human place because it's the first time we're sort of, he doesn't say this exactly in these words, but it's the first time the romantic is in a structure that's purely human and purely built up by people. And that there is a sort of optimism about it in his look at how popular art is responding to that. And I think that what you see with the injection of the noir into detective fiction or detective fiction into the style of the noir, however you want to phrase it, is a movement away from this sort of romanticizing of the modern metropolis into showing it as the asphalt jungle. There's a transformation of it from the city as the modern romantic, whatever wilderness that humans have made up into, it's a movement from the garden into the city as this kind of concrete desert. I think that's sort of the trace. And I think Chesterton right now in his writing is at the beginning of that. He sees it as the kind of the garden, right? Something humans have made and is
Yeah, I mean,
good.
I think he recognizes though that, and if you've read any of, I mean, G.K. Chesterton goes and writes some of the great detective novels. I don't know if you've ever read any of his stories.
The Father
Um,
Brown.
he wrote the Father Brown stories, yeah. And there's, but one of his ideas is he recognizes that it's sort of this idea that, well, there's evil, there is evil, like anything, there is evil in the world, but there's this idea that it can be found, it can be controlled, it can be discovered, it can be rooted out, and that's one of the major themes of early detective fiction. Especially Poe does that obviously a lot. Holmes really does that. There's really this idea in Sherlock Holmes that if you just think about the problem enough, you'll figure it out. Chesterton is going a different route, which is his idea is with his Father Brown character is supposed to be that, well, he's a priest. He's just a regular normal guy, but he's constantly exposed to evil, and so he can see it, he can find it. It's not necessarily that it needs to be found through rationalization, but he can find it just the same as everybody else, and you can you can purge it and then go back to everything as it used to be. Christie does that too. Christie kind of has that in the sense that she's not in the city, but she still is this idea of something comes in, it invades, it breaks things, and then the detective finds it, roots it out, and brings everything back to sort of stasis, back to the normal state of affairs. The later ones start, especially when you get to Chandler and Kane and Hammett, there's more of this idea that no, 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 no. This is a core part of what it is to live in this society. It's broken.
Mm.
And the evil is not just it kind of shows up and then you root it out and then you get rid of it. It is there. It's part of it's part of what makes up the society. They'll trace it to different roots. Hammett's going to find it much more in sort of the social structure
Mm.
because he sort of has more of a social agenda going on. But they're going to find it in there, and they're going to argue that basically the detective is just he's sort of like the Spartans at Thermopylae. Like they're just holding back all of this evil from sort of bursting forth into the world, and that becomes the genre as it moves through time, I think.
Yeah, it's a movement from, to use the critic Northrop Frye had this idea of the tragic, comic, romantic, and ironic. And detective fiction, I don't think is comic. Maybe we could say with Agatha Christie, there's some high comedy going on. And it's not tragic exactly. That's definitely the wrong word for a lot of it. But there seems to be a movement from romantic. The world is essentially good. There's some kind of darkness that comes into it, and we bravely get rid of it. And then the ironic, in which the world isn't tragic, it's just irreparable, right? It's just part of how the world is. The world cannot be put back together again. Tragedy implies the evil comes, the catharsis happens, the world collapses, and good sort of persists. You know, every Shakespeare tragedy, potentially Macbeth's an exception, um, good persists at the end of the tragedy, in spite of the tragedy. That doesn't seem to be the case when you get into 40s and 50s detective fiction, or earlier than that too, 30s detective fiction as well, especially. Um, and it seems to be this kind of movement into irony that seems to be happening. And here at the start of it, reading Holmes and reading these and reading Agatha Christie as I am right now, there is such a kind of romantic optimism, and that's going to kind of fall away. It seems like Chandler is someone who wants to preserve some of that in his characters, especially in his Philip Marlowe character, and he has a bit more optimism than I would say like Hammett, who really sees the social structure as utterly black. But it's still a dark world he's in. You're still not going to purge the world of evil in any of this kind of hard-boiled stuff. And maybe later on, maybe when you get past, 1960s, 1970s, you can get past this kind of age of irony in detective fiction. But really, what you see, it moves to different cultures. I mean, you see it in Japanese noir, which is all post World War II, which is very, very dark. Um, and you see it in like the girl with the dragon tattoo, which is from this kind of culture that's supposedly ideal and everybody's kind and there's not very much crime. And however, underneath it is this incredible, disgusting sexual violence that seems to implicate the Norse countries. Um, and so it seems like what survives out of detective fiction is in part the optimism. You see this in NCIS, right? Where they solve the case, everybody has a beer, and somebody makes a joke and winks, and it's all good. Um,
But so much of modern television, detective fiction does that. A lot of
mm,
it does. I mean, beginning with Perry Mason. Have you ever watched the Perry Masons?
I haven't, no.
No, I haven't
Those
seen
are
it.
great. Oh, those are great. It just, but they are exactly what you did. I mean, Perry
Mm,
Mason's a lawyer, and it is that exact like the world is broken, some crime happens. Perry Mason will step in and save his client, and then everything. There's always a big court scene, and then everyone they find the guilty party, and then the whole thing sloshes off again. It's very optimistic, but they're fun. They're boilerplate, but a lot of early, especially in the 90s, Law and Order, a lot of those detective stories fall into that category. If you watch those, say go and watch the SVU one now. They do not do that anymore. It's really interesting to see how we've kind of gone a different, it feels like a post-war kind of thing. That was what a lot of the 90s and early 2000s detective fiction was that more traditional uh deeply, essentially conservative in the sense that everything goes back to the way that it was in the beginning. SVU has a much darker feel to it now because a lot of it is just there's this sense that the world is just broken and they can't do anything to save it. And even when they find the right person, everyone affected by it is somehow tainted. And there's this sense that the world is kind of warped because of what's going on. There's a sense that you can't go back to what it used to be that wasn't there in um a lot of 90s detective fiction. It's almost go the greatest detective fiction of the 90s I think is Twin Peaks. And Twin
Yes.
Peak, that's the best example, but it doesn't quite fit this story because I don't think
They're not
I don't
interested
think
in solving the murder. Like the
no,
show's not
that's the
interested in
great.
solving the murder, right?
yeah,
But that's the greatest detective fiction, and it's sort of out of this picture. But it's the anomalous one. Most 90s detective stories and that sort of procedural crime or any of those kind of things, they're often fairly happy. Jerry Orbach gets, he makes his quips and he goes on his merry way. but that's how they end. But watching any, I don't watch a lot of it nowadays, but anytime my wife has SVU on, or she has the new one where like the Detective Stabler is now doing like organized crime unit working undercover, and it's just like every single time it's like, man, this world is just broken that they're showing there's no hope. Everything they do, it all crumbles apart. So there's you can actually see it even in our own time, this cyclical thing going on of how crime fiction and it really does reflect, I think, what's going on in an underlying society and how people are viewing their world.
Yes, I think those are the two poles, right? There's the optimistic and there's this pessimistic. There's the romantic and the ironic. And that seems to be obviously historically contingent. You can see much more pessimistic stuff in the 40s. It gets a little optimistic in the mid 40s when you're in war. It's a lot more pessimistic after the war. But, American noir and that kind of detective noir, the kind of more intense, pessimistic stuff, it doesn't really get too far into the 1950s. You have Touch of Evil in 1958, but the 1950s were, I don't know, maybe you disagree, Pat or KJ. I thought the 1950s were a little lighter when it came to film depiction of detective stuff. But then you go to Japan in the 1950s when they're remaking their culture, and that stuff is very dark that I've been watching recently. Um,
I'm actually really looking forward to that. I've never seen any Japanese noir, and I didn't even know, I had no idea it existed, and I think it should be really cool. I'm actually really looking forward to that one.
yes, it's going to be fun. Criterion has a whole series out now that you can see them kind of in order. But yeah, so it seems to be that it's a really good cultural barometer, detective fiction. And that's probably why the noir is so important, because the noir it's not a genre, it's a visual
It's a
style.
style. It's a
It's
style.
a visual style and a tone too, I think. There's a bit of a
It's not a
tone.
genre. It's a style.
Yes. But I think that's why it's so helpful and why it comes in. Because the expressionistic stuff that makes the noir, I mean, it starts before World War One, but it really takes off during and after. And then the way noir adapts the kind of German stuff occurs in the 1930s when things are not very good in Germany and elsewhere. And so it seems like the more noir, the more style of noir you bring in, that seems to be almost the indicator of the ironic or the pessimistic. And the more, Agatha Christie, BBC special,
Murder, She
1980s,
Wrote.
yeah, Murder She Wrote, that type of thing, that seems to be.
There's been another murder.
That seems to be like the counterweight, right? It seems to be like noir is that sort of sliding scale that you could put more in, you could take more out, but your position vis-a-vis the society is going to show by how much you inject into the detective story.
Now there's an irony. There's a particular, and I know we use the word irony, but there's a particular sort of level of irony I think that's going on though, because if you've ever read, Raymond Chandler has his this sort of great essay called The Simple Art of Murder.
Hmm.
And
Which
it's
I
about,
think is the name of the season. I think we're going to call this season The Simple
oh
Art of.
yeah, that's a good, yeah.
Yeah, let's call it
Um,
that, The Simple Art of Murder.
Yeah,
Again.
and I wrote a short story once where I called it down these dark streets a man must go. It's sort of there's which I love. It's one of the great lines from that essay. But the Chandler's argument is he hates Agatha Christie. He hates her, and he just rakes her over the coals. And he rakes over a lot of these guys. My favorite one he just absolutely eviscerates is A. A. Milne. I'm like, oh, he wrote a murder mystery. The Winnie the Pooh guy wrote a murder mystery. Apparently he did. But he just rips him. I mean, he just spends half the essay pointing out every single thing that's wrong with A. A. Milne's murder story. And his essential argument is these are stupid. These are people playing games with crime and murder, that no one would ever commit a crime that way, and that it's completely unrealistic and it doesn't reflect reality. So his argument is we are giving crime back to the people who commit them, is sort of his way. I think that's how he phrases it. There's this idea that that all of this is fake. I'm gonna show you how it really is. So there's this, the pessimism comes with this sense of self, and not quite self-satisfaction, but sort of this sense of, I'm gonna show you what the real world is, kid. And it's almost like, yeah, but is it the real world? Who's ever experienced any of this stuff? Like, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I get it, it's out there, but that's not really the real world. That's, it is the real world, but it's also fantasy in the same way that
Mm,
Agatha Christie sort of is fantasy, in the sense that I don't think any crime's ever been committed the way Raymond Chandler has a crime being committed. Maybe they are, but
mm.
there is a sense of fantasy in both of them. But the noir often has this sort of self-satisfaction of saying that, no, I'm showing you the world is horrible, kid. The world is terrible. Everything's awful, and I'm going to show you how it really is. But they're fun. I mean, I actually
Mhm.
like those more. I get his point. Having read a bunch of Agatha Christie novels, they are kind of gracious. They do great on you, but they're fun. But they're also like, what? That's just stupid. Like there is an element of them that's that too. So I
Mhm.
get his frustration, but this sort of self-satisfaction of, I'm righteous and going to show you how the world really is, also kind of has its own frustrations of them. But I think they're all fun. I think clearly I like the genre.
Yeah, that's always the problem with this kind of like emo attitude, right?
Yeah,
It's
I
the
mean
problem with
it's
pessimism.
emo.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's emo. I
Mm.
mean, it is. I mean, Raymond Chandler was essentially the emo of the 1940s.
Yeah, but that's always the problem with this because I think it's a good point you're making. It's like this isn't also the real world. It's just darker, right? It's not like most people don't experience any of this. I mean, the crimes you experience are pretty moderate relative to, what you're reading about in these books. And so even though like they do, I think, reflect attitudes right now. That detective fiction's really good at reflecting attitudes. It's also an escape, and I think ultimately that's the key to the popularity, is that it's a really, really fun escape from, whatever. And so there's an irony in that too, as in it's trying to capture this cultural barometer by offering people, or it's acting as a cultural barometer, I should say, while offering people a means of escaping what turns out to be pretty mundane, easy to get along lives. That's the thing with detective fiction. And what award-winning fiction, whatever you want to call it, literary fiction or whatnot, really doesn't do. I mean, literary fiction at this time is trying to offer people a view into their own desperation, their own middle class desperation, or something like that, which is, you see through the
I'm a
20th
catcher in
century.
the rye.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And this is like really serious and whatever. Um, but it's, but that's only one way of, I guess, getting at things. But anyway, regardless, it's still a fantasy. It's not, and I think that's what makes it different from quote unquote literary fiction, even though most of it is very, very literary, is that, yeah, it doesn't really have an interest in the actual mundane of the world. It seems to have much more of an interest in the sort of feel and texture of the world, the feel and texture of a time or an era. And detective fiction, for whatever reason, I think is, from what I've been reading in preparing for this podcast, seems to be really, really good at that.
We should talk about the movie before we do. I mean, I feel like
Before
we
we
should
get,
talk about the movie.
yes, let's get into the movie. So we did watch for this week, the William Gillette version of Sherlock Holmes, which was filmed in 1916. It was a eight-reeler, and we also took a look at Fritz Lang's.
We're all just laughing. It's
Yeah, yeah. A little background in that movie, I suppose, is so William Gillette. One thing I should say, William Gillette is a Connecticut person, from kind of Connecticut royalty. I mean, his mother was a very famous hooker, and he had built
oh, very
a,
classy, very
yeah.
classy.
Oh, sorry. Descendant of Thomas Hooker, the Puritan
Oh,
founder of
well, that should
Hartford.
have been
Sorry.
clarified.
It's like my
I
first
thought it
thought
was
was
Gypsy Rose Lee kind of thing.
my
It's
first
like,
thought,
oh.
what is Connecticut royalty? And then Tom answered it right away. I was like, oh,
It's like, oh, wow,
that's
Connecticut's getting
slang. I
knocked
just
down a
I
little bit
missed it.
here.
Yeah, sorry. Thomas Hooker was a uh, Puritan who founded whatever. He's a descendant of that guy, and he was an actor who wanted to adapt Sherlock Holmes on stage and eventually played him 1,300 times with Conan Doyle's blessing. Apparently he wrote Conan Doyle and said, like, um, Conan Doyle had tried to write a play, had kept failing because he didn't know how to do it. And eventually Gillette took it over and wrote to Conan Doyle and said, "Would it be okay if I marry off Holmes?" And Conan Doyle responded, "Marry him, kill him, do whatever you want to him." Who at this point, this is
This
when,
was clearly at his point where he hated the
oh, this is when he
character.
abandoned the character. This is after
Yeah.
he
Oh, okay.
killed
Yeah.
him,
Yeah. Yeah.
and before the resurrection. And so Conan Doyle was just done with Holmes and handed him over to Gillette. Gillette made a ton of money and played this character a bunch of times on stage. He built a beautiful house that you could tour out in Connecticut, the Gillette Castle. It is a very, very, very flamboyant and very unusual looking home, but it is a lot of fun to visit. And they then filmed this in
Is it open
1916.
to the public, or
Oh
did you
yeah,
just
did
visit
it
it on your own?
just broke in one night.
I think it's a very fun place to visit. You should all go.
No, there are tours available.
Tom's also a prince of Connecticut, a hooker. He's he just walks into whatever castle he wants.
Tom just went into a brothel in Connecticut.
This looks like Gillette's castle. It's fantastic. I'll be Mr. Holmes.
But they had made the movie out of this play, translated it into French, lost it, found a copy of it in French, reconstructed it, and translated it back to English in, I think, 19 in 2017 or
2014.
2014, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
So it has this kind of long history, and it is one of the great stage successes. It's a 19th century into 20th century stage success, but it is one of the great stage successes that is toured everywhere in the world, pretty much. Um, and so, as a historical curiosity, it can be considered very interesting.
I absolutely get it as a stage play, though. This is the thing. Like, it's one of the classic errors of early film, which is essentially they just filmed a play, and it it really doesn't work when it's this kind of play, because it's essentially just it's intolerable, because what's really fascinating though is I can totally, you just kind of watch and you go, oh, I can see why this was like the opening has Holmes sitting there doing some scientific experiment. He's like throwing things on like a thing and there's all these flames and like, oh, you could totally see that. Oh, that happened on stage. That exact thing happened on stage. And then there's a whole thing where Moriarty has a giant fire pit in the middle of his desk so he can burn papers, I guess. Um, and that's something that would be really great on stage. Moriarty has this desk that literally flames, and he can throw things in there, and you can see how it really worked on the stage. It's not actually, I would argue, it's actually not really a Sherlock Holmes story, but it you can see how it might have been a really interesting play. You can also see how it is an intolerable film because it just doesn't make any sense. There's so much dialogue that they have to stick up on the title cards as a silent film, and very little actually happens. And it just, there's no sense of what they're doing or why they're doing it, or their attempt to film sort of fight scenes are laughable. It's like, well, I get that, there's a great one where there's a fight going on at the bottom of the stairs and apparently no one at the top can hear it. And I'm like, no, the film is silent. The fight isn't. Like, the actual event should be silent. The film is silent. So it had problems.
You don't see really any deductions going on.
No.
You don't see any of Holmes's. And to be fair, I just read through all of the Holmes stories. A lot of the fun of Holmes isn't just the deductions. Often he doesn't solve the cases that way. He just sort of introduces them, and it sort of introduces his character in that way.
There's a reason, I've heard, my best thing to put it, there's a reason they're called the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. They are adventures. They're action-packed. Things happen. There are gunfights and there are shootings and there are, costumes and all this kind of stuff. It's meant to be eventual. There's things are supposed to happen that, Agatha Christie stories, nothing ever happens. But in Sherlock Holmes stories, they're supposed to be adventures. They do things. They go places. They're meant to have a lot of action. Holmes obviously thinks of things, but that's their his sort of considerations of things is almost secondary. It drives the plot forward, but they're adventures.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't, the deductions are not why you're there. That's just a character building thing very often. And in this, you have neither the adventures. They're pretty limited, and you also don't have the deduction, so you lose the character of Holmes entirely in the silent film. Um, I wonder on stage if it was more talky, you can see him do things, and you can see them hint at it. At one point, they introduce the fake Alice Faulkner, who appears to have been a version of Irene Adler, and the much less interesting. And he can tell immediately that this is not the real Alice Faulkner, and go, okay, this is a Holmes deduction thing. We're going to hear the deduction and how this is just commonplace if you follow the logic, and we get none of that. We don't get his deduction. We don't know how he knows this is not the real Alice Faulkner, and so the fun of the character is gone. Um, but yeah, the adventures are sort of hard to piece together. And my guess is they just cut a ton of dialogue. I wonder almost if this was so well known that it was not really thought of as
It's also
including this
possible, yeah.
dialogue, just because he had been seen everywhere. That this is you know, I mean, imagine going to see Star Wars and like instead of um, hearing the dialogue, they played the soundtrack really loud, like they had a live audience or something like that.
Yeah,
No
I
one
can
Hmm.
would
see
care.
exactly
Yeah,
that.
it'd be
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
It's a good
Um,
example. Actually, it's really, really good example.
So this is my introduction to Sherlock Holmes. I've not sat and focused on a. So this is, as far as I
Oh,
know,
gravy,
this
please don't.
is Sherlock Holmes. This is all I got. And I was a little disappointed. I was waiting for the "That's elementary, my dear Watson" to come up on a title card.
he
Nothing.
never
I
says
I
that
don't
He
though.
never
even know
says
that
that.
he talked to Watson that much
Yeah,
in this
Watson
film.
is
I mean, but
barely in the movie.
barely is there. He just shows up as like, and now Holmes is. I love it. It was a great title card. And now he lives with Watson because his apartment was burned down. I'm like, why? Why did we see that?
We don't see the burn down.
You don't see the burned out apartment. We have no explanation for it. It's
Yeah.
just an apartment burned down.
There is one there is one story where they burned down 22 Baker Street, right?
221B.
221B.
I don't remember that one, but it could be.
Yeah, I think there's one where they burn it and then they have to they're not there for that reason. Um but anyway, yeah, we I don't
Really? At that early? I don't remember. It could be, but I don't remember
Mhm,
one that early. But
mhm. Where they burn it. I thought so. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, yeah, they don't. But Gillette was kind of known for creating really interesting special effects. And so, as you were
I
saying, that,
can absolutely see that. I can
yeah,
absolutely see that. I didn't know that, and it shows up so much. You can tell he was trying to capture things that really worked well on stage, and they would have been. I mean, they would have been, they would have been that sort of like campy, theatrically impressive things, like basically having Spider-Man come in on wires. But it's sort of the equivalent of that. But I imagine they were very effective, and people really liked them, and that they created a really cool atmosphere. You can see this being a really good play, and that people probably sat through this play and were like, "Oh my God, the best thing I've ever seen," and really being into it as a stage play.
yeah, he had a lot of special effects, a lot of kind of lightning and sound effects people liked a lot. He was sort of known for that. And this is in an era in American theater where you really, really, really needed to kind of these kind of grand displays. I can think of August
Oh,
Daly's.
oh, that's changed.
Well, I think there's a particular thing that's going on. No, I don't think it's changed, but I think there's a particular thing going on, which is interesting. So I would say that what's happening at this time in the 19th century is you're getting you're getting a backdoor into realism. So you have these really, really big displays. I think of Under the Gaslight, where it's the first time they had the women tied to a railroad track thing that was staged and whatnot. And so you
Like
had these,
Dudley Doolittle or that kind of thing.
yeah, so you had these really big melodramatic displays, but everybody really wanted realism, so the displays had to look more and more real. And so the acting, though it was melodramatic, was trying to also bring in some more and more realism, which is completely different from like the Chekhov angle, where you meditate in a castle for 6 months on the play to see what objectives everyone has or something like that. And it seems like Gillette was a big part of that. He was a big part of trying to make things more realistic by having more realistic special effects.
I mean, his performance, though, I mean, it's pretty actually for the standards, especially at that time. It's actually pretty grounded. Like if you watch him, he's not doing the like his face kind of doing the contorted thing. Like it's actually pretty. Even Moriarty has those moments where he's gonna have the bug-eyed thing of the like, oh, and you're like, what is like I know what you're doing, I get it, it's time for it, but it's sort of it's very weird acting.
Mhm.
You can see why Stanislavski hated some of these actors. But he Gillette does actually give a good performance. It's not that it's not a good performance. I would just argue it's not Holmes because there's nothing you could easily have swapped out any other name and it would have been the same movie. No one would have sat there and been like, "Oh, that's Sherlock Holmes." They might have thought, "Oh, it's a character that's stealing some tropes of Sherlock Holmes, but it's not actually Sherlock Holmes because he's not." I mean, there is a great, I can't remember which critic. There's some critic, I think it was relatively contemporary, who said something along the lines of, "Well, Sherlock Holmes isn't actually a character. He's just a couple of catchphrases and an attitude," which is sort of true. I mean, Holmes doesn't really actually do that much. He doesn't really actually have that much character. He has a couple attributes. But he's probably one of the figures that almost every person, when you mention him, can picture that person. It's like him, Santa Claus, like Sherlock Holmes. Those are people that everybody knows. They have a picture of that person in their head. So you could easily have swapped out Sherlock Holmes for anybody else, and that movie would have been the same, I would argue.
Yeah. Gillette, I think so from a contemporary point of view. Gillette did help create the visual image of Holmes.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't come up with the deerstalker cap. That was an artist, but he did use that and popularize it. And the pipe that he smokes, that was the first time he had a kind of distinct pipe. I think he filled in the visual elements of the character, which aren't really in the books, other than what is he? He's like 6 feet
He's
tall or
tall.
something
He's supposed
like
to be very
that.
tall. He's
Yeah,
just very thin. He's very long fingers.
hmm yeah,
Um,
good boxer for some
well,
reason.
if you've seen the Robert Downey Jr. ones, it's like he's not a good boxer. He's like, Superman. But
I
um,
saw that scene where he boxes through deduction.
yeah, and he's like left foot stepping here, F up here to bog. I'm like, what the ball? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's fine. I get it, but
Mm,
it's actually not a terrible adaptation, actually. But Basil Rath. Have you ever seen the Basil Rathbone ones?
I have.
Those are much closer. I mean, and that is really what people I think really think of when they think of Holmes is Basil Rathbone. But those are quite fun to watch.
They are. And I think they're inheriting from Gillette in some way, at least the
Yeah,
visual
I agree.
stuff.
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
So there is a kind of history there. And it's also interesting to see what people thought Holmes was like at a time when Doyle was still writing these things. Right? He was a
But did they
live
really
character.
think that? I mean, I guess it depends. To your point, was the play so well known that the movie could just shorthand it? Because again, the movie, for all intents and purposes, I don't really think that being Holmes at all.
Mhm.
I think you can see it as being a visual thing, but there's nothing about the character, the way the character behaves, anything the character does
Mhm.
that would suggest Holmes
Mhm.
per se. The movie strikes me more as, well, we made a lot of money off a play, let's make a lot of money off a movie. But I suspect it's fascinating to watch the movie because I bet you can see the hints of what the play probably was. And the play probably had those elements in the way that the movie just, because again, if you're going to call Holmes more of an attitude and some
Mhm.
catchphrases, well, you can't really do attitude in silent film, and you can't do any catchphrases in silent films. So
So
what are you going to do in a
yeah,
silent film? What is he?
it
You can't,
dissolves. That's right.
yeah, it just vanishes into weird plot, giant title cards with tons of dialogue and explanation. When you have to put a title card up saying Holmes's plot unfolds, and then they have see him doing something, I'm like, yeah, I could have figured that out. Like I don't think they had. They basically were just, and especially this is why I was, I do. There is almost. I was joking, but it feels like if these people made the Lord of the Rings into a movie, they would have made nine, 12 of them because they basically took this play and turned it into apparently based on the title cards, three different movies you had to go see to get the whole
Mhm.
thing, and they probably were just raking the nickels here, just
Mhm.
rake them in. That's what they were trying to do,
Yeah.
which is fine. This felt more like a weird insight into profit grabbing off of intellectual property in the 19 teens than it does feel like like an actual adaptation of a Sherlock Holmes film.
Yeah. Yeah, the latter ones are obviously a lot more fun. I don't know the Downey one very well.
I've only seen the first one. I only saw the first one,
Yeah,
which came out almost I think 20 years ago or
at
something.
this point. Have you seen the one from the 80s and 90s with
I saw one, I think. I think I saw that when I was a kid, the adaptation they did of they did one of the Hunt of the Baskervilles.
they did, but this 190s one did all of them, I think, through a number of years.
I think I saw their Hound of the Baskervilles when I was a kid because I love Hound of the Baskervilles. That's the best one by far. I love that book. And so I saw that movie. I saw the Basil Rathbone one. And I remember watching some of them when I was a kid, but I don't remember it exactly.
Yeah, it was Jeremy Brett, the Jeremy Brett one from the 1984 to 1994.
If I saw them, it was when I was like 10 years old.
Yeah, it was not as 41 episodes. They did.
Yeah, I'll have to check them out.
They really churned.
I mean, Sherlock Holmes just has some fascinating. I mean, he's a character. I mean, in Auguste Dupin, obviously. I mean, he doesn't last. Poe doesn't really write that much about him, but he's also not all that interesting of a character per se. Um, but Holmes just kind of has the almost in even the way that Hercule Poirot doesn't quite have. He just has like the perfect balance to make a really good detective stories that you can plug him into so many places and he just works. I remember I played the Infocom text adventure game of Sherlock Holmes back in the day. I remember that one. They still have I think Frogware makes adventure games of them. Like there's just so many things he just slots so well into, and he's just fun to watch in a way that some of the other characters that no one else has quite captured it, that detective fiction as well as Holmes has.
Yes, I think it's just he is physically brave in a way that you can't really see with Miss Marple or with Poirot.
Oh, I
He-
mean, Poirot admits he's not brave. He's like, I'm a coward.
yeah, even though I guess he fought in World War One, so whatever.
No, he didn't.
I thought he was in World War One.
Poirot didn't. No, Poirot didn't. Captain Hastings did.
Hastings. I thought Poirot had gotten a
No, Poirot
cut.
ran away. Poirot was in Belgium, and he
Oh,
leaves. That's the whole plot. Is he leaves Belgium during World War One? I mean, he doesn't run away. He's like 60, but he was in Belgium during when the Germans invaded, and he's a refugee. That's why he's in the town.
oh, okay. I did not realize that. Okay. Well, regardless, they don't. They're not physically. They're not people you would want to be. I would not want to
No,
be Poirot. Maybe Philip Marlowe, but that's a kind of
I
different
don't think
genre.
even then, I don't even know if you would want to be. I mean, I like Philip Marlowe. But it's like, does anybody want to live that sort of? I mean, he's kind of sad, and he's got no. He's always saying, I get, if you're going to be a detective, you never have any money, and it's always tough. The appeal of them is that I guess the appeal of Marlowe and Sam Spade and those characters are that they always know what's going on. They always got it together. But the reality is but they're honest, and people like that probably don't make a ton of money,
Mhm.
and they probably don't have, they probably are kind of lonely and they have a tough life. But Holmes has this beautiful apartment right in the middle of London. He smokes all the time. He's got beautiful landlady. He's got a landlady and food and comfort, and he's happy and he reads his book because he
Mhm.
does morphine. But he's got a good, you sort of look at this man and you're like, yeah, I could live the life
Mhm.
of of a upper middle class Victorian man who knows everything. I
Mhm.
could live that life. It seems like it's pretty good. I mean, I think that maybe that is the appeal of him.
Yeah, it's somebody we would want to be.
So it's a bad adaptation. I mean, I think that's just the point.
It's
I think I suspect that the stage version probably wasn't much better. I suspect it was just a pop version of Holmes to rake in some money, but it sounds like it was very effective as a stage piece. I don't think it translates into silent film
no, it doesn't
at
translate
all.
well. It's interesting to see that. It seems like and we'll get into this next week. Next week we're doing Sherlock Holmes too. It seems also that what's interesting too is Scandal in Bohemia seems to still be the most popular one of the shorter fictions. That one continues to endure. I mean, that was one of the more popular ones with the very recent series, the Benedict Cumberbatch Martin Friedman series. That
I never watched those. I heard they were good, yeah.
they're fun. They're fun. I some people don't like them. I enjoyed them quite a lot, except for the last season. The last season it starts to kind of crumble a little bit. It gets a little large. There's a sister character, and there's Moriarty comes back, and Holmes has to come back, and
Got the Doctor Who problem where they constantly felt the need to up the ante.
oh,
So they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Perry Mason never had that problem. Every
uh,
single episode of Perry Mason is exactly the same. Like, but so many modern. I mean, this is just one of the things of just modern film and shows in general. They always are like, we gotta up the ante. We gotta make it bigger. We gotta make it bigger. Every season has to be bigger, and they kind of do this. Whereas, yeah, you go watch Perry Mason. Every single episode's exactly the same. There's never
Nothing
there's never
changes.
any higher stakes. There's no we don't know anything about it. It's not like Perry Mason's sister gets kidnapped and he has to go save his mother from a madman he once saved in a trial and like this kind of stuff. No, none of that happens. Just nope, another murder happened. Perry Mason has found out who killed him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, do we want to talk about Paul Schneider's article or yeah, I thought this was fine. I
I
think
really liked the article.
yeah,
I do really like it. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's good because I mean a few things. It recognizes the different kind of tenets of noir. It's trying to do a stylistics of noir, which is very hard to do, but I think he's pretty successful with it. Um, I think sometimes the tenets get a little much. A complex chronological order is frequently used. Is well, I think that could be in a lot of different things that are not exactly noir. But generally, I think this offers a kind of blueprint as well as an insight into the confusion about this style.
I think there is an interesting thing. What I do appreciate he kind of points out is his sort of subdivision of noir. He gives some sort of stylistic elements of noir, and it is true. Noir isn't a genre. You can technically apply the style. I would argue noir is a style. You can apply that style to any genre. It tends to apply best to crime. It just does. I think you can argue there are certainly other things that have a noir-esque element. Things like I think some of the later Eugene O'Neill has a noir-esque element. They're not crime, but they have a noir element to them. But a lot of noir tends to have a certain style to it. It tends to be the shadowy kind of thing. He gives a number of examples. What I kind of appreciated was his and I think he's right, having seen some of them, is his breakdown into sort of three different areas of noir. There's sort of the romantic noir that exists pre-war and then sort of into the war, and then the post-war era, which sort of starts to get more gritty, more violent, more, quote unquote realistic, and then the sort of complete breakdown even of that into just like psychotic
Hmm.
noir, essentially, which was interesting mostly because the ones he was saying I've seen almost every movie that he labels as the romantic noir.
Hmm.
I think I've seen almost every one of those movies. I've seen some of the later ones, but I haven't seen as many of them. And so I kind of thought, I'm like, oh, I think he's right. I actually do. I do like the earlier ones. So that was interesting to sort of see that broken down. And there is something interesting about sort of the article as a whole. I think that there's some good points that he makes in it.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think the that chronological breakdown really makes a lot of sense. And I think the leaning into the style and the sort of elements of it, I think he gets a little too nitty-gritty here, but
Like which
most of it
ones
works. I
do you
think
think it?
um there's a romance that's involved. There's a romantic narration in part of it. Well, that's more than noir. There is an almost Freudian attachment to water. I
He's right though, but
you
he's
think so?
right. I mean, he's right in the sense that, and I don't think it's Freudian. I think
Mm,
that's just stupid. But there is, it's true. A lot of them take place on docks. A lot of them
mm,
take place in the rain. A lot of, and I think there is a case to be made. Well, why is that? I think it has more to do with, well, rain has a noir-esque element. If you want to make his argument, he makes arguments about the verticality of light, the
mhm,
verticality of slicing. Well, rain is very vertical.
yeah,
Rain has a sort of a vertically slicing effect. It tends to affect light in a really in an unusual way.
mm,
And so I think water does, I think rain and sort of the movement of rain and how it affects light is very true. It's also true that locations by water tend to have a sort of remote sense of foreboding associated with them. I think there is a sense in which a lot of these things take place by the docks. A lot, and again, there might be more of an element in that sense of water as a transition element of moving from one place to another, of things coming in the night. Even Chandler does it a lot. Think of Lady in the Lake. Think of these things. There is actually an element. I think he's right, but I think it has more to do not with water, but the water's effects, the effects of lighting that it has, the effects of division of sceneries, the effect of separation of interiors from exteriors. The water really makes very clear is separations of interiors and exteriors. I think that there is something to be said that the fact that a lot of them use water, I don't think it has anything actually to do with water itself. I think it
mm,
has more to do with how water separates spaces and how water sort of represents movement of things. But
yeah. And it's
I
also
actually liked that insight, but
mhm, okay. I was probably a ton of noir examples without a lot of water, but I see your point, and it's also a place where one can be invisible. You could dump things in there and not find them again, right? It's the opaque, absolutely. Um, but yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the other thing too is that he says at one point that this essay in the essay that the noir is creating visual solutions to sociological problems in ways that he says gangster films couldn't. That's one of his like takeaway conclusions
I
that I
think that's
really
stupid.
struggled with.
That's stupid. Yeah, that's just stupid.
Mhm.
But that's I needed to make this about social things, and I needed to make some grand statement, and I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I don't think it's true. I think there is something about um, s- distrust of society that's going on in noir. Certainly, there is a
Noir is a fundamentally existentialist film
yeah.
style. It's a stylistic expression of existentialism. So yes, it is
It is, and
absolutely
it
it has
comes
it has a
along
destructive.
at times when you're questioning social order. I do think that that's true, and I think that's right. I just don't think noir provides solutions. And I don't know what it means to provide visual solutions. I don't even know what that would look like. And so that kind of takeaway I
No
struggle with.
styles don't provide
Yeah,
solutions.
I'm not, yeah, I don't, unless it's a blueprint to how to build something, that doesn't make any sense. However, I think this essay is really good for the elements that it puts forward, namely that sort of breakdown and that sort of stylistics breakdown of noir and the idea of noir as this this particular style and feel, as opposed to any kind of genre. Um, and what you're saying, the chronological stuff, especially you get with America, and also the insight about how much Germans have contributed to it. It's not just
Oh,
German
I mean, I guess
expressionism.
I've heard that many times. I've heard
Yeah.
that so many times, but
Well, it's not just German expressionism, but like, oh, I didn't realize like these Germans in America are really the people who are making a lot of this great stuff. Um, yeah, I had heard that so much too about German expressionism and whatnot. It didn't click to me like how many American noir filmmakers were actually German by birth. But yeah, regardless.
don't make too big of a deal of that, he says.
Yeah, yeah,
Too much of a big deal is made of that.
yeah.
I mean, I just it's an interesting article. I did enjoy a number of his breakdowns of things, and I appreciated his attempt to sort of to identify specific elements, and a lot of them are sort of not obvious, but again, the idea of light and sort of a lot of those kind of things, as KJ was saying, it's like, well, I was just assuming we're going to see a lot of shadows in this genre.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, It is sort of the fast talking people talking in the shadows, and then we
Mm.
gotta go down. There is that is a stereotype of noir. I don't know, and I don't know what it is about noir that I really do enjoy. I'm hoping that maybe if we watch a bunch of them and kind of talk about it, because I don't think I've ever talked to that many people about noir. It is by far the style and the film that I find the most appealing for a long time. It's just like I just like watching these kind of movies, and I don't know what it is about them. So I think it will make for an interesting season to figure out to see if we can narrow down what it is about this style, about sort of the genre of detective fiction in general that appeals.
Yeah, I think it will be. I'm looking forward to it. And I am excited for next week. I think we're going to jump, I believe, into more homes. I'll take a look at it. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing Sherlock Holmes. KJ, if you could do a crossover with Sherlock Holmes and some other media, what would it be?
So, like I said, this week, I guess, this is my introduction to Sherlock Holmes, audience. This is all new to me, apart from being able to recognize him in the pipe. But after watching 4 or 5 different Sherlock Holmes stories, I would love to see the Friends episode where, I don't know, David Schwimmer is also Sherlock Holmes and they're trying to solve a mystery, right? Pick one of these and it's the 6 of them. Maybe they're accusing each other, maybe the landlord or the guy that owns the coffee shop. I just think it'd be really fun to have the Friends guys do a Sherlock episode. How about you, Pat? What would your crossover be?
So I think this would be fun to discuss next week, but I have a theory about how, after having watched a number of these in a row, this is not my first, like I feel like I'm fairly familiar with Sherlock Holmes. Actually, I think the first Sherlock Holmes I've ever seen though is Hound of the Baskervilles. I think I saw that when I was like 6 or 7 years old. So that was my first introduction to Sherlock Holmes ever, was the Basil Rathbone Hound of the Baskervilles. But I have a theory about how I think Sherlock Holmes kind of functions in our society now. So as an intro to that, I would like to see Sherlock Holmes done as a Greek tragedy. So a verse play version of Sherlock Holmes, and that will lead into my theory about how this character works in our society.
The
Oh.
Dr. Watson Greek chorus.
Mhm.
There's a whole bunch of him. Oh, sorry. I'm jumping the gun.
That actually makes sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
too much deduction here.
Sherlock as Oedipus, Watson as Greek chorus. Yeah, well, it works pretty well.
Tom, what about you? What would you do?
Yeah, I think my Sherlock Holmes adaptation would be a sort of existential Sartre type thing, like a no exit thing, where Holmes is in that kind of situation trying to answer a question or solve a crime that has no answer or solution to it. It would be like Sherlock Holmes in Twin Peaks. They never can solve the crime, and that's all you see. That I think would be a lot of fun. Existential Sherlock Holmes, but only if it was funny. If they took it seriously, that would be miserable, but that could potentially be very funny.
So the other version of this then that I thought of we could also throw out there is Sherlock Holmes as a chatbot, because it just reminded me of KJ's one last year when we talked about the trial, and he said it just reminded him of a chatbot that was getting more and more deranged in its responses.
The Sherlock chatbot just keeps solving whatever you're typing. You're like, no, I'm not even looking for you to solve
Not
anything
even
right now.
not looking for this. Nope, don't need to try to devise what I'm saying from my typos. Nope, don't need this.